Let me give you just a little bit of context real quickly before the main speaker comes up. Here's the deal. I grew up going to a Catholic church every single Sunday. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and we went to church every single Sunday. And one of 6 kids, as soon as I got off to Ohio State University, you know, the things that I lived for were Ohio State, Michigan football, you know, going to spring break. I didn't go to church anymore. Bottom line is I came down to Dallas, Texas. I met a girl who had no religious upbringing at all, and we got invited to that big old mega church across the road called Fellowship Church. And I was about 98, and I got my first Bible study ever. And along that same time period, my mother had sent me a tape. She's the one that everybody thought was just so religious. You know what I'm talking about? Like if you met her, she'd be putting holy water and getting you scapulars and things like that. And she sent me a tape called Signs from God, Science Test Faith. It was on a big VHS tape, you know. And I thought it was amazing, but I didn't know what it meant. In fact, I was not going to Catholic church, but I was really studying the difference between a Protestant and Catholic. Long story short is, I lost that tape. My mother passed away very tragically in 2004. And about 2008, so 9 years later, some guy calls me and says, "Hey, Tim, I was cleaning out my house and I found you left a tape at my house." And he said, "I thought maybe you'd want it." And I got there and it was my mom's VHS tape. See, the problem is I never found out what it meant. And I told Ron earlier, I called Fox News. I was like, what? I had 2 questions, you know. Is it real? And what does it mean? And it took me like 9-10 years to find that out. And we won't be going into that full story tonight, but I got a hold of Mr. Ron Tesoriero. Am I saying that right, Ron? I never said it right like 5, 6, 7 years ago. But I got a hold of Ron Tesoriero from Australia through the internet, like a spaz that I am, sent him like 5 pages of how I'm called to do this, I'm sure. And Ron sent me a book called Reason to Believe. And by the way, I know Ron, you give any money he gets, they give to the Mary McCallop Foundation. I mean, he's not in this for money. I don't make a red cent off any of the stuff back there. But if you don't got that book, if you didn't get that book, make sure you leave with the book, whether you're agnostic, atheist, Catholic, whatever. Just leave with the book. It's amazing. But what happened is when I heard the story, it changed my life, to say the least. And I had one thing to say, and that's probably why you're all here tonight. The ones that have already seen this. I said, why doesn't everybody know about this? And I called Ron and I said, Ron, we need to get you on Larry King. We need to get you on Oprah. And he said, because I'm kind of a passionate spaz and he's real laid back and methodical. And he said, not now, Tim. We're doing more research. I'm like, more research? Unbelievable. And for those of you who have never seen this, what you're going to miss is there's a lady that Ron personally filmed. There's this guy, he's a household name in Australia. Think of Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes, Anderson Cooper, Pierce Morgan. That's who he is in Australia. And when Ron researched all of this stuff and came to believe it's true, I remember he goes, it would be like wanting a portrait of your wife and your next door neighbor was Leonardo da Vinci. And he goes, that was my neighbor, Mike Willesee, famous. And he said, I wanted the whole world to know this. I wanted the whole world to know this. And so when back in 2008 or so, I had a chance for them to come into the United States, and we filmed them. There's a DVD back there, but I want you to know that there's so much more. He personally filmed the lady, this famous personality. They filmed a lady having a stigmata. You won't see that tonight. A statue crying and bleeding. For 5 years I've been talking about this and showing the films, and people say, but did you see it yourself? Like, well, no. And I said, but here we have a guy who did it. The film footage you see, he was the primary person. In fact, nothing like that has ever been filmed in history, ever, with the prophetic statement of Miss Catalina Rivas. But there was something very profound, I won't steal his thunder, that he'd been working on as it relates as a Catholic to the source and summit of our faith. And I'm sure he'll go into the details of how that came about, yes? A little bit. He was called on, he was the main person involved, he's a very humble man, when the then Cardinal and the now Pope Francis called Dr. Ricardo Castanon And Mr. Tesoriero was there filming the primary investigation. And it is literally life-changing. I want to warn you. He's very smart. He's very analytical. He's very in-depth. So if you're scientific, you're going to love him. If you're like me, you're going to have to hear it like 5 times. It's a lot to chew on. There's a book, there's a DVD. We got plenty of time. We're going to hang out. And we actually have a follow-up starting Monday. And it's just absolutely life-changing. He's been to, I don't know, 3 places in the United States. And this is his last stop before he moves on. And it happened to be at St. Francis of Assisi, the very name the then Cardinal, the now Pope, took on. So we feel it's very providential. So if you give a warm welcome all the way from Australia from Mr. Ron Tesoriero.
You already pointed out that there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of these Eucharistic miracles that take place, and that's what I want to make that point. Are they limited to the Catholic Church, or the Eastern Orthodox, or Anglican, or any other denomination?
I'm not aware of any. People always say, why does it happen in the Catholic Church? Jesus can never get it right. You know, why is it here? Why is it there? Why isn't it somewhere else? I think that, Jesus does, anyone who's seen that movie, Heaven is for Real, is that, most of you have heard about that one? There was an experience given to people of Protestant belief. So I think God gives to each something that they're familiar with and helps them along in their cause. People can't be criticised for being Protestant if they've been brought up that way. But I think that these stories are certainly aids to help the Protestants in their understanding of the Eucharist. After all, for 1500 years, Protestants believed what we believe, and then they chose that the Eucharist was only symbolic and not real. And what these experiences are showing through the Eucharist is that it is real, that what they have misinterpreted in the Bible is wrong, and that perhaps from this they will come back to us. So anyway, as to whether it happens in other churches, I really don't know. It hasn't been, my concern has been what has happened here and what can we draw from it. As to whether it's not happening somewhere else is something I can't comment on. Yeah.
Like her, I'd like to thank you for everything you're doing. I'm afraid that in the end you won't be able to prove anything definitively, but I think that's just God's divine wisdom. I remember when I was in college studying philosophy, I was agnostic back then, and I said, well, you know what, if he really exists, why doesn't he just write it in the sky? Here, I'm God, I'm here, believe in me. And he could show himself to us every day.
He did that once.
He did. Yes, he did. But the true love is going to come from faith, not from him imposing his will on us. And I think we all have to keep that in mind. In the end, he created us. We're not creating him. And a God that is capable of creating the universe and is capable of creating a life, as you have observed in this sample from a piece of bread, is clearly infinitely more powerful than any of us, infinitely more intelligent than any of us. And we should just pray every day that he will help us to get to know him the way he really wants us to know him.
So, I liked your message today, and I thought it was really good, but one of the problems that we've had, about amazing things, these amazing things that we've heard about, is that we don't get the message out, enough so that people actually understand and know about these kinds of amazing things that happen. So what's our plan to spread it around to everyone in the U.S. and so that they actually know about what's going on?
Well, Tim Francis is doing a great job in that already, and I'm sure that it will reach many people. But as I mentioned to you, this documentary that's in the process of being made will ultimately be one that will air throughout the world, I hope, like Signs from God did. And the beginnings of that are happening now. So it will be a well talked about and discussed subject matter. So I think that the claims that I'm making here, and having regard to the person behind the story, it won't help but reach the world in one form or other. Hopefully it will be in a form that's capable of being accepted. That's why the documentary is being done, to try and present it for its truth, and it will certainly be publicly exposed in that way.
Yeah, and I just like to say on a micro level, it's going to be very strong to home. On a macro level, it's going to be through the movie theaters and through the media. Just the way everything else is spread, frankly, Facebook, viral, that kind of thing. It's going to be organized. If you want to know more about that, be here Monday night. We have a very specific plan. I mean, we're talking about putting up billboards all across the United States. We're not just like, oh, this is kind of neat. We have a very, very on-target plan to spread it and follow through with it. I hate the fact that people can see a video and then walk away and not find out anything else. I'm like, this needs to be followed through. And I have to say that miracles, if these are truly miracles of Christ, and I agree, most people probably who decide not to believe, they won't believe anyways. But you know what? It hasn't been the case in 5 years. I've shown people coming back to the church, and I have to ask myself, if this is from Christ, why should we be quiet about it? He's doing it for a reason. I mean, and what Ron's done is so golden because he keeps digging and digging and digging and digging. Every time you dig, there's more gold. And I don't think it's up to the priests and the bishops. I think it's up to the laity, as it always was in the early church. And I think that's
You know, as believers, which I guess maybe the majority of us here are.
I'm sorry,
Can you hear me?
I missed the first words.
As believers,
Oh yes, okay.
as most of us are here, I think we should take comfort that maybe when we do get a DNA from those bones, if we do, when we do, we may just find one side, because does the divine participant in that conception even have a DNA? That's something I think we can take comfort in. I think it's something very possible.
Yes, yes. I honestly think that the DNA testing results will be phenomenal. I think that I see it in a sort of way like this. That remember, the Shroud of Turin lasted for 1900 years, and all you could see of it was the faint image, the outline on the cloth. But when photography was invented, God obviously thought it was time to show more of what was there, and when they went into the dark room and took a photograph of what was on the cloth, a positive photograph of Christ came out. Now, he didn't make that available in prior centuries. Why didn't he? It seemed to be at a time when faith was needed. Now, in addition to the images on the cloth, his blood is on that cloth. And it's only in recent times, in the last 20 or so years, that the technology has reached the point where they can examine that blood. And I think it's like another time capsule that will find the information out when God wants it to, and we seem to be moving that way. And if that does eventuate, and if we do find that the blood on the shroud matches the person whose blood is in the Eucharist, then we've got a very interesting thing. We've got blood from a dead person on the cloth, and blood from a living person, the same person today in the Eucharist. So, if you follow that, blood from a dead person, but that same person today, his blood is living. So it seems to indicate to us that, one, the resurrection, two, that Jesus is living presence in the Eucharist. So, I mean, that would be one consequence of a match between those two samples.
Just one other comment. All of us can take a lot of comfort, I think, and thanks that each time from this day forward, when we receive the Eucharist, it's going to have a whole lot more meaning than it has ever had.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Can you get a statement from that man? He sums it up well. Thanks. I want him to give it so that he can give it to the Pope. But when I finish the book, the man who I wanted to give it to is the Pope. So I just see that I'm going to get a hearing. I mean, I think that it will be seriously considered. It's only early days yet. I've submitted it to a Catholic geneticist who He's a professor of genetics and a member of the Polish Academy of Science, and he agrees with my argument. So it's not like it's far-fetched. It's got legs as an argument. How the church deal with it, I don't know. All I can do is tell you what I think. The church can say what it thinks, but they've got a lot of thinking to do.
Yeah, I just want to add that as I said, we have to be careful to say what the church teaches. Right, and they've been wrong before. It's not an infallible statement. So they're free now, but this is not a dogma of the church. The church doesn't teach on science. And so it's important for people to understand that it might not say, well, the church allows this, there's some freedom. But I think the key here is people who promote the Darwinian theory of the evolution of man are people who primarily are atheists, okay?
I believe that the Pope himself subscribes to the theory of evolution. Obviously,
Well, which Pope?
that God-
The current one?
Francis.
Francis.
And if he does, I
Well,
don't think he could be wrong.
Yeah.
He could be,
Right.
I'm saying,
Yeah.
but this shouldn't give anyone the impression that there's a contradiction between evolution and ecology. Because there is, from the top, we've been told, as of now,
Yeah.
there is not a contradiction. in
Yeah.
it.
Look, it may take 150 years for what I'm saying to be pulled apart and thought about. I don't know the answer. But all I know is from a logical position, you can't maintain the evolutionary argument of all life coming from there when there's an exception. And all means all. And Darwin said, if ever this happens, my theory falls down. So all I do is presenting the material. There's a lot of other people in the world who can think about it, argue with it, but they've got to reject these facts that have happened, and it's a hard set of facts to reject, I think.
I'm in Santorin, Portugal, and I wanted to know if you have done any studies on
No.
Eucharistic miracles.
I haven't I haven't got enough lives.
The water, when the water was around to the host, did it not evaporate?
The water,
Water, the water was poured down to the host. I would think that a normal process would be about evaporation.
yes.
Adding water.
In the first 30 days, I think the material was there was still water there. I think it was transferred into a test tube with distilled water after 3 weeks. I don't know. I think that it may still have had water in it, in the bowl in that time. I haven't checked with them on that, but all I know is it was transferred into a bowl after 30 days, into that test tube. So, but even so, let's assume the worst case scenario, that this is a fraud and that someone has dropped a piece of living heart tissue in the water. Then within 3 minutes those white blood cells should have gone. And then you have to think, you saw the key witness, the old lady. Could you imagine her wandering into somewhere and cutting open a person, removing a piece of living heart from him without that person dying, transporting it there and putting it in the bowl? It just doesn't add up that it's a fraud. There's no way that you could argue it's a fraud. And if it's not a fraud and it's a reality, then I say the consequences are great. Life has come from non-living matter. Complex life creates a problem for Darwin. Yeah. Yes.
Well, this is a pretty simple question. In all the studies of the different flesh and blood samples in all the different areas of the world where there were Eucharistic miracles, did they ever come up with a consistent blood type
Yeah.
between all the samples they studied?
Yeah. See, things have passed beyond blood typing now. If they find a blood type AB, and it might match someone else, one of the others, that still does not exclude, 50% of the population, because they may also have that blood type. Whereas modern day testing is more specific. It can tell the identity of that person down to a barcode, very specific, tell you, so you don't waste the sample with things that are not going to be helpful. So when that option came up in our tests, it was there, but we were advised that it's really not going to help us that much, because let's say we get a blood type and someone else has the same blood type, but we might find by coincidence that all the people in that row have the same blood type, but it doesn't tell us who the individual is.
But if all these samples, if the church seems to think that all of these are the flesh of Jesus, the blood of Jesus, but but we can't say whether they all have the same blood type.
Yeah. But you see, blood type, in this room there might be a number of people who all have the same blood type. It doesn't point out who the individual is. Could be any one of those people. So it's not, whereas another type of test which is done today is more specific. It will tell you your barcode for you. So that's the thing we want in each case. So that you eliminate the possibility that, oh, it could be someone else. Because you can all, so long as there's a possibility that it could be someone else, the argument is it could be, therefore you can't conclude that it's that person.
If you have a question, I'll get to you in a minute. Microphone's sitting here.
Yes, I believe in all this, but if I run into somebody who says, you fabricated all this information, the scientists are fake, the doctors are fake, where can I get that information that proves who they are and if they're reputable?
Okay, well, if you get Unseen, if you look at Unseen, the book Unseen, you will see that it is very detailed, and it's the most detailed you'll find because you're listening there? Sorry. Does the gentleman want to hear the answer? You right? Yeah. Okay. Well, in the book it describes who the people are, where you'll find them on the internet, their works, the reports that they have given to me, and it fills in those gaps that people have. Well, how do you know who they are? What reputation have they got? What do they actually say? That was covered in the book, and there's a lot of detail in there that will answer a lot of the questions you might have about the science and the individuals. Let me just say something to you about shopping for the right scientist. I'll tell you what happened. When we couldn't get the genetic code out of the sample in Argentina, we decided to go to Germany, where there's a special university that has professors that have written the book on how to do DNA typing, the actual, like, the highest you can find in the scientific world. So my journalist friend Mike Willis and I got on an aeroplane and flew to Germany. Now, from Australia, Germany is just not like up the road like it is for you people. It's a damn long way. We went there specifically to have the test done. So we write in advance saying we want to come there, we want to do this, we'll tell you all about it when we come. And normally when I do these tests, I don't tell a lie, I tell something that's sort of true. I say, look, I'm a lawyer working on a case. I need to know the identity of the person, or I need to know the identity of the material that's in this slide. I need to keep the matter confidential. So will you be prepared to do the test on a blind basis that way? That way they don't put up barriers about the subject matter. Well, when we went to Germany, the professors wouldn't accept that. They wanted to know exactly where this came from before they would do the tests. And my friend weakened because I come all this way to Germany, and what do? Do we say, take it away, or we tell them, or take the risk? Well, we took the risk and we told them, and they said, no, we won't do this examination, because if you are right, if you're saying there was a communion host that transferred into that, then this would be an embarrassment to this university to have to report that, because this university is founded on neo-Darwinism and evolutionary biology, and that this would create such confusion here and such a problem that we might have to close down part of the university. So there's a good example of the problems you have when people know the subject matter, and the propensity of bias that you can have both ways. You can have Christians saying, I want to get a good result. We can have atheists saying, no, don't want to do it.
Yes, on one of the original questions about the chain of evidence, the host we were talking about to start with, and what I understood, there was a person during communion that went to one of the female Eucharistic ministers and told them that they saw a hole in a candelabra. That Eucharistic minister went to the candelabra, retrieved what was supposed to be the hole, and placed it in a bowl of water. The theory of evolution says that everything starts out in a bowl of water in a chemical reaction. Is there a possibility that the theory of evolution is beginning over again?
The answer to that is the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution deals with the situation when life has started. It doesn't have an answer for how life started. It only deals with how life is claimed to have evolved. So the question is not a valid question in the context of evolution. So it's not an evolution issue. You with me?
Yes.
Incidentally, and also there's no known way in which a piece of bread can turn to flesh. But the fact is it did happen. It did happen. And just like no one knows how life started. It's only an assumption. But we do know the circumstances where it happened here. We don't know the circumstances where it happened in the other claim. No one can say it was the year 3 million years, 850,000 in this place at that time that this happened. Here are the circumstances. I can. Now for science, who supposedly has as its mantra, you must look at evidence, not assumptions. We've got some evidence.
Okay, back on the chain of evidence. Is everyone absolutely 100% sure that that was a hoax?
All right. Let's say it wasn't a host. Let's say it was what they found. Let's go the other way. And certainly, the evidence is certainly that it was a host, because when the Eucharistic minister saw it, he brought the priest, Father Alexandra, over and showed it to him. They were both there together, they saw it. So, 2 witnesses, host. Now, in court matters, you have the witnesses saying yes, the witnesses say no, coming in each door. Call in the witnesses who say they saw what happened and put it in there. 1, 2, 3 maybe. Let's call in the ones who said it didn't happen. There aren't any. So how can you argue against the witness to say this did happen? But let's assume they're lying to us, right? Let's assume the old lady's a liar, the priest is really a liar, not a real priest, and the other priest is also a liar because they saw it. Okay, so we've got someone's come in then with a piece of heart tissue that's living. They've had to take it from a human being, a living person. So they've got to cut it out of their heart. And you saw where the scientist said it came from. Now you can't take that out of a heart, even if you had a friendly surgeon, without killing the person. You can't remove a part of the heart. So let's say they did it and the person's still alive and they brought it in. They carried it in something or other, but it was found to be in water. But we know from the scientific material there that if it was water, then the tissue would deteriorate and the white blood cells would die within a few minutes. But they're still alive. So that's inconsistent with the idea that something was brought in. But then when you look at the photographic evidence, you see they pulled it out after 7 days, and you saw in that first photo there was a host and a beginning of a red stuff surrounding the host. So there was a relationship still with the host and this item. It was visible in those early photos. They then lock it, photograph it, professional photographer, lock it in the tabernacle, and then come back 7 days later and see that something has changed. So that change could either only occur through one of 2 ways. Either it happened by itself or someone got in there and did it. But again, the evidence doesn't follow, because it was locked again separately and only one person had the key. And you can see from the chain of the photographs that there's a process that seems to have gone on, because there's a correlation between the size of the host in the first case and what it is in the second case. It's actually moved from being visible to non-visible, and the quantity of blood and tissue grown. So it's inconsistent that someone put something there. So there's no evidence, no one's coming in that door saying negatives. These are only positives. So you have to say on the evidence that's available, it was a host that was put in there. And the other thing is that you saw at the early part of that film the priest standing up in World Youth Day, in Sydney, telling his testimony. He had to get permission to come to tell his testimony. And do you know who he had to get permission of? Archbishop Bergoglio. So he has, as a reference for credibility, probably the best man in the world. He knows the credibility of that man. He wouldn't pull something over us. So they're all factors that helped strengthen the claim that this story is valid.